a wholesale grower, trees and shrubs. So if any of the local garden centers that you buy from, most of them buy from us. My mom is the CEO, so we have 8 or 9 of us in the family still active in the business. And I worked away from the business for a number of years and have been back for 10 years now at the organization. We're based in Woodbury, but we grow all over the country. This is at our facility in Oregon. We also have fields in Washington, Illinois, and our breeding farm is in Georgia. So we supply to all of North America, and then the consumer brands that we own are sold all around the world. North America, Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. And so when I was growing up, I worked a lot in the business and didn't really know what I was doing. I was unloading semis and spacing plants in the fields, but not really working in horticulture. And so then I left, worked in entertainment, totally different world, and have been back now full-time at the company for 10 years and was working for the company in a different capacity before that. So it's been about 15 years I've been back in plants and have learned everything by doing. And so as I was starting to work on this book, I wanted to write something for me 10 years ago, something that I could have understood, but also have something that, even if you're a master gardener, you could find something new and exciting in it. So when I started thinking about design, you see a picture like this. This is at our farm down in Cottage Grove. It looks pretty simple and easy. You've got some panicle hydrangeas and some Carl Forester grass, 9-bark in there. Really pretty easy, but to make something that is beautiful and sustainable for the long term really does take a lot of work. And so you have to think about all of these different elements that go into it, which can be really intimidating and sort of take the fun out of it. And so as I was going through developing this concept and having the conversation, really it started with friends and family, and then with a colleague of mine who's a garden writer, and just saying like how I approach design with that small group of people. So that's a book. That's where we have to start off. Take some of this scary intimidation away and make it fun. And so when I think about design, I take it a little bit out of horticulture first. We don't start with plants. Look at the world outside. Start with fashion. You think about things that inspire you. What do you really like? What do you like about it? So like the Dan Levy picture on your left where he's got that really cool Tom Brown kilt on, like I think is awesome and really powerful. I wouldn't wear it myself, and you don't want to see me wearing that with my very pale Irish legs after a Minnesota winter. But I know that I appreciate that, and I like the strength of what that means. Same with architecture. You might see the Frank Lloyd Wright building and say, that's really awesome, or you love the Sydney Opera House. So start to look at those things outside of the world. What aesthetically do you like about it? But then also think a little bit about function. I love the Eames chair, but for me, I love a mid-century mod moment, but functionally, you might say, I've got a long, crazy day, so I'd love to come just melt into a couch. So starting to think about those things outside of the plant world before you really start digging in. And then we start talking about what your space offers you and then what you want to put into it. So when thinking about like that big, long list, right, of all those design elements you have to think about, trying to take some of that intimidation away, building some of this into your everyday life, I broke it down into different moments throughout the day, starting with coffee. So everything in my world revolves around food and drinks. And so making this, having a little bit of fun with it, starting with coffee, and starting to look at what, again, your space is going to offer you, but also what's happening, kind of like you did with the fashion, furniture, and architecture. Now we're starting to look at plants. So starting with this idea of going on a little coffee walk, whether it's your neighborhood or friends and family's neighborhood, starting to see what you're appreciating, what you like, or maybe what you don't like about what others have in their landscape. So this is a pretty classic garden design, not Minnesota, because we can see that Japanese maple in there that we wish we could have, but our zone just doesn't accommodate that. But maybe you like this really sort of classic look. You've got the sharp lines of the irises in front, that beautiful hydrangea flanking that Japanese maple. Then you've got some of that stonework. So what do you like about that? What don't you like about it? Maybe you've got a neighbor or you're someone in your friends or family's neighborhood that has a little bit more of a wild planting design like this. This is at our garden in Cottage Grove. That really intense color. Decide, is that something that you like? Do you like that really close planting, how they have it here? Maybe it's on the exact opposite side of the spectrum. And you have this really modern design. And you say, maybe not for me, but what do you like about it? Do you like that there's that water feature down the middle that you can see all the way through with that glass? Finding those little nuggets of what you like as you're doing this coffee talk in the morning. Then moving on to brunch. This is an area, a topic that isn't maybe like the most fun to talk about, thinking about your soil type, but it's a really important foundational element that if you don't know what you've got, then you're not setting yourself up for long-term success, because if you've got really sandy soil and you plant that hydrangea that I was showing you earlier, it's not going to survive beyond really this year. It might survive, for sure not going to thrive. So this is an example of a garden on Cape Cod with a really great designer, C.L. Fernari. She chose to embrace her really sandy, rocky soil that she's got and chose plants that do really well. You can see she's got some echinacea or coneflower in there, catmint, which is that sort of purple effervescent things on the side. She's got spirea and smoke bush in the back. Found things that did really, really well for her. This is another design talking about embracing the soil that they've got. This is a good friend. Actually, I just saw his book back on the shelf as well, Kelly Norris in Des Moines, Iowa. He's a fabulous author, designer, speaker. He did what most of us would never do, and he brought truckloads of sand into his backyard instead of removing it, because he really wanted to challenge himself and talk about plants of place and really embrace that sandy soil. This is after its first year of planting that he had this really beautiful, lush landscape, because again, he chose plants that do really well. This is Zone 5 in Iowa, but lots of plants that do really well for us. The one that I love to point out, you can see those little mounds of yellow throughout. It was a seeded annual in there, but it's called prairie broomweed. And it's called broomweed because if you took it out of the ground, you could literally turn it upside down and sweep your yard with it. So it's really turgid, so that's why you have that really beautiful mound, but a great way to embrace the soil that you've got without having to do a lot of amending. This is an image from my dad's house in Woodbury, and I'll show you a bunch of pictures from this project throughout this. We've got really heavy clay soil in a lot of the land at the property at his house, which a lot of us do here. So this is another one where we just took that and embraced it a little bit and found plants that do really well in that heavier soil that retains a lot of water. Again, not a great place for that hydrangea that I showed you earlier, but this brown-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia, that's in here, you can see the little dots of maroon that are popping in. That's Monarda or bee balm. Another great one for that heavier clay soil. Sedum, stilby, hostas, all great things that do really well in that heavier soil. If you're looking at shrub material for that type of soil, this is brand new Forsythia that's coming out this spring. This is called Spring Fling. So again, that early season of color and a woody shrub that's going to give you some of that structure, but can handle that heavier soil. So you've got things like Forsythia, dogwood, coralberry, potentilla, ninebark, all those that really embrace that soil. If you've got heavy clay soil, you've got sandy soil, and you want that hydrangea, it's okay. You can go in and do some amending as well. So you have to know what that soil is first, what you've got. You might have different pockets throughout, and decide if you're going to embrace or adapt it. Moving on to lunch. This is the section of the book we talk about planting zone, and a lot of us in Minnesota know that we are in a Zone 4 planting zone, USDA zone, shorter growing season, really extremes in our temperatures. So talking here, I don't really like to belabor that because it seems a little bit limiting, but what I like to think about when we're thinking about our place in the zone that we are in is talking about plant selection that does really well. Does anyone know the term nativar? No one has ever known that in all of the talks that I've given, so you're in very good company. But what a nativar is a native species plant that is cultivated. So it's a cultivar of a native species. And so finding plants that have evolved here over time, not only great for the the ecological system of your landscape, but also great for pollinators as well. But what a nativar does is takes something like a button bush, which is great if you've got like a really wet spot of your yard that takes forever in spring to dry out. It's great because it sucks that up. It's like a dogwood. It does the same thing. But the native species gets really big and rangy and kind of ugly. And so there's a new cultivar out called Fiber Optics that brings it down in size. It's much better behaved. It was a natural selection, so there was no breeding work done to manipulate it, but it is cultivated, so you have broader access to it in garden centers, and it's just a more well-behaved plant. So, if you think about that nativar, it's a great way to add ecological benefits, but also gives you a little bit of a better plant for a more modern landscape. Unless you've got tons and tons of prairie where you don't care if things get sprawling out, it's a great way to take that the essence of that native plant and bring it into your landscape now. From there, the best part of the day, happy hour. Same kind of idea here where I talk about planting zones. This is about light. And I don't like to belabor the full sun, full shade in between. You can Google that and find a list all day long. So the way that I like to think about light is how it can impact your plant selection and what it can do for how you experience the space. So if you're someone that loves to have people over for happy hour and sit out on your patio at night and watching that sunset, these pictures are both from our gardens in Cottage Grove at that time of day. And so on your right-hand side, you've got Millennium ornamental onion, planted in a lot of landscapes in the upper Midwest. Really beautiful, adds lots of color. But I love to see it at this time of day because it brings out different shades of purple. And look at how much more you see that texture as the sun comes from behind it. Same on the other side, on your left, that's Rattlesnake Master. It's not a really beautiful plant if you just put one in and then put a bunch of mulch around it. But this is a design that's much more densely planted, comes up, brings lots of texture, some of those cool tones to the landscape. But look at it at sunset. Really, really makes it come alive. And so thinking about how sun can play an impact this way, rather than just, is it going to keep your plant alive, I think is really fun. Couple more. We've got lots and lots of sugar maples in our landscapes here. But think about this. This one on your left is called Matador. It was selected in Woodbury at Bailey for its really incredible fall color. Really much more vibrant, longer lasting. The leaves stay on a little bit longer than other sugar maples. But if you're doing dishes at night, you've got that the sun coming in through those leaves. Yeah, it just adds a little bit of extra. It takes a good plant and makes it really, really great. The plant on the right, does anyone know what that is? It's in a lot of landscapes as well, but it's kind of a trick question because it's close up. That's fountain grass. A lot of us have them, great ornamental grass that's lower growing. But again, a really good plant that's used a lot in our landscapes. But how do you make that really great and really extra special? Well, they bloom late in the season. So if you have that in September, plant it somewhere where you get a little bit of sunrise, a little early morning light when you've got dew on there. And again, it just makes it that little bit more special. So again, that's how I like to think about light, and how I would challenge you as you're going in and picking and selecting plants for your projects. Think about how light plays on it, not just keeping it alive. Then we move from happy hour to dinner. This is the scary part for me because I'm not very good at budgeting. My husband is around here somewhere and he would echo this. I'm really good at spending money, but not very good at planning. So dinner is where we start to put the guardrails up a little bit and talk about scope. Are you just doing a couple pots for your patio? Are you doing a big area? When we bought our house, it had been flipped and they ripped everything out of the backyard other than some big trees. So we have really big projects. But now is when you start to think about, what are you going to do? What do you need to put into the space? How much work do you want to do? And then the really scary B word, the budget. How much do you want to spend? So this is where the guardrails start to settle in. This is also a photo from my dad's house. And when you're getting into this conversation around, like, what are you actually going to do and how much are you going to do? How much plumbing and electrical and hardscaping, all of those things that go in and add up really, really fast. Having the conversation about why you're doing this. And it could be really functional. It could be that you've got that really wet spot in the yard and instead of putting a bunch of drain tile in, you're going to put some button bush and dogwood. Maybe it is you've got that really like shady kind of weird spot in the back of your yard that has a lot of weeds in there, and you don't want to weed it every year. So let's plant some things that do really well in shade, but will give you really beautiful ornamental value as well. For my dad's project, because we have been in Woodbury since before the city was called Woodbury and have farmed it for a long time, we had this plot of land that we were able to carve out between my mom and her siblings. And so we had 10 acres. And when we built the house, we put a lot of turf in, because there's 4 of us and young and playing sports and stuff in the front yard. They wanted some grass for us to play in, and now we're all grown and gone. And so he wanted to restore it back to native prairie. So for him, that's what he wanted to do. He still has some turf in there. We got grandkids and all that, but he wanted to do as much as he could. So we've got this beautiful river birch, and you'll see a lot of brown-eyed Susan, because the first year was a lot of selective seed to keep weed pressure down. So there's lots of brown-eyed Susans. But again, understanding why you're doing it and when you're going to be experiencing it. So if you go to the cabin for a lot of your summer, don't plant a garden that's going to be blooming and going crazy in the summer, because wasting a little bit of your money putting plants in that are just going to celebrate that one time when you're not really there. And maintenance too. If you're not around to maintain it, maybe plant a garden that's going to be beautiful in fall. This is a panicle hydrangea called Berry White. You might know like a limelight or vanilla strawberry. This is a newer one, Berry White. When we introduced it, my boss, every time we would have a party, he would have to play Berry White in the background. He's a really deep voice, and so he would love to announce this one. But it's a really incredible, like if you've got, need a flowering shrub border, instead of just putting in an arborvitae or something like this is going to get about 6 feet tall. But because our nights cool down and our days are warm in Minnesota, these panicle hydrangeas can turn color, and this one is incredibly, incredibly deep. This is just a picture from my iPhone. It's not photoshopped or anything. This is just what it does. And it's got really, really strong stems as well. Because some of the panicle hydrangeas, if they get big, they start to flop. This one just does that. And this is in our trial block where we do nothing to it other than we have drip irrigation to keep them alive. That's about it. So this is also my dad's house, and I was mentioning that we were doing this big prairie restoration project, and we were converting about 3 acres back to prairie. We've got these big, beautiful white oaks. And so as we were talking about it, we're like, okay, what can we actually take on? What can we do ourselves versus what do we need to hire out? So again, back to the scary budget word. But we wanted to do what we could in the most important areas that we called our high visibility areas. So this was from the back deck looking down. So we picked 6 areas that we wanted to really intentionally plant. So it's, again, kind of hard to see here because there's so many of the brown-eyed Susans from that first year. But we put some structural plants in as well. Joe Pyeweed in the back. Back here, we've got some dogwood, 9-bark. In the front, we've got some phlox paniculata, which are also nativars. Is the dogwood and the 9-bark, actually. They were all nativars. So we picked this place to do some really intentional planting where we went out with shovels ourselves and did it. The rest of it, we were not going to do 3 acres by hand. And so that one, we worked with a company called Minnesota Native Landscapes. We built out the seed mix with them so that we knew what plants would be coming up, and we're really intentional about that. But then they came in and did all the prep work and all the sprays, and then they come back and we've done, I think, 1 burn now after the 3rd year, and then they'll come in and do some hand weeding as well. So again, just understanding like what could we do as our small team at the planting, but then maintenance too. That's a big area that we want to maintain. So what can my dad do on his own versus what do we have Minnesota Native Landscapes come handle? From there, we actually started getting into the design piece of it, which is a lot of the fun, right? So when I was thinking about this, the whole book is about like making a space that is unique to you and making something that you really can celebrate and enjoy. And so I was thinking, how do you take all of this, what every individual person could want, and narrow that focus into a book? And so I built out 3 different archetypes to at least give you a starting point. 3 different unique perspectives that you might be like, I am 100% that one, or I might be a little of each. So I start with the Martha. You might start to see who they're named after. This is that classic cottage garden design. It is, even though I call it classic, it is not boring at all. And if you follow Martha Stewart on any social media, you will see she is not boring. She just posted some pictures yesterday. I'm like, how are you 82 years old? She's just incredible and fun. So this was named in her honor. Her gardener, Ryan McAllister, is a good friend of mine as well, and so he's sharing this section with her, and she loved it. So very, very fun to be able to have that with her too. But this is about functional design. It's really beautiful. It incorporates annuals, perennials, edibles, shrubs, trees, roses in a really intentional, thoughtfully planted design that is not just a shrub, mulch, perennial. It's really incorporated, but also is quite legible. This one is really focused on seasonality, textures, function. And as we go through this, you can see an example here. Within each section, I give you some recipe cards and some ideas for how to actually implement this. We also have case studies built in. Our house is actually one of the case studies in there to show you, like, how do these people actually, this archetype, how does it come to life? And remember that really scary list from the beginning of all those different design elements? As we go through these sections, I also talk about how each of these three distinct design styles would utilize color, texture, scale, shape, so that as you determine which one you might fit into, you can see how you actually implement that into your space. So a few examples of Martha. This is back to that garden on Cape Cod. This is a really kind of boring section off of her driveway that you would typically just drive right past. And we all have those spots, right? Where it just fades into the background and is nothing special. But you can make little beautiful moments like this. And this is very like that classic Martha design, where she took this bench, which is only this big. It's a tiny little bench, but added a few deco pots to it. She's got the yellow wax bells planted around it, so there's that like nice neutral green space around the base. And then mixed in there, she's got some polka dot plant, wax begonia, so all the flowers you see in there are begonias. Persian shield, which is that purple that's sticking up through the top. It just adds a little bit of color and a little bit of beauty in an otherwise dull space. This is also at her house. This is her she shed, and this is like what she does every day, so she has gone a little overboard from what a lot of us would do, but has an absolutely beautiful space. This is, so that picture I showed you earlier of that sand gravel garden in front, this is right up the hill, so she looks out her front door to this every day. I like to bring this one up because, you know, pretty classic design. She's got some Yugo pine, panicle hydrangeas in there. But thinking about how you bring a space together, especially if you've got a few different gardens that you're trying to pull in, one of the ways that she's done it here, you can sort of see in the foreground that sort of faded out red, and then you look back to the her window boxes that she's got there. In her instance, she's using color to start pulling all these together. You can use similar or the same plants in multiple areas, but being able to create a cohesive design is really, really indicative of this Martha aesthetic. Also, mass planting or monochromatic color. This is called All the Rage Rose, planted in Newport at my uncle's house. So he's got all the rage planted all around, and then some Minnesota stone to make it very of place. Just a side note, All the Rage is from a collection called Easy Elegance Roses that were bred specifically for Minnesota, not just to survive here, but thrive in Zone 4. They're all recurrent blooming, so they'll bloom spring all the way through frost, to be disease resistant. And they're all shrub roses, so they're not like the old hybrid teas that you have to dig and tip. These will survive, even if they die back to the crown. They're own root roses. So sometimes roses will be grafted, and so if it does die back to the ground, which happens in Zone 4, it depends on what the root is. You might get a different rose that's going to come back than what you initially planted. So having own root roses helps, where if we do have a dieback season, it'll come back still as the rose that you intended to be there. So again, really great way to incorporate it. This one, you're going to have to bear with me for a second. I had to put this in, and I have to keep it in all of my spring talks, because it has my favorite underutilized shrub for spring. So this is at our office. In the background, you can kind of see our office is our original family home from 1902 that we all work in now. But this is, in most years, this is early April at our office. We'll see what it's going to look like this year. This might be July, who knows? But on your far right-hand side, that sort of fiery color is called Amber Jubilee 9-bark. I'll show it a couple times. Next, Standing Ovation Service Berry is next to it. We've got some Sorbaria, some Barberry in front, but the one that I really, really love is the white bloomer in the middle. That is called Lotus Moon Pearl Bush. That's just one single plant, so it's going to get a little bit bigger. So another one, if you want like a spring blooming hedge, great plant for that. If you need one focal point, also really fabulous for that. It just explodes with early season color. And it's called Pearl Bush because before the flowers open, it looks like little strands of pearls that are coming down that sort of just cascade, and then all of a sudden it just explodes like that. Beautiful foliage in the summer, and then great fall color as well. So I like a plant that does more than one thing, gives you more than one season. It's going to make it in the ground. We all have somewhat limited space, right? So it's got to do something extra for you. So this one I love because it's a great way for us to start off our spring after our long winters, and it gives you that great multi-season interest as well. The next one, the next archetype or design style that I've included is called the Kelly, named after Kelly Norris, who I mentioned earlier. His new book is called New Naturalism, and it's all about bringing this sort of like prairie aesthetic back to an everyday home. It doesn't just rely on going to the Arboretum to see something that's really beautiful. It has that really dense planting. You can do it at home. This is actually his front yard. I'll show a few more pictures from his place as well. But this one is really dense textural planting, really sustainability focused, lots of that native R planting in his design style. I like to call it intentional wildness because you can see there's a lot going on in here. So this one, if you are willing and able and have the time to put in a little bit more work, this one does take a little bit more, so it doesn't get overrun, but it's really, really, absolutely spectacularly beautiful. This is an example from our garden in Cottage Grove again. With the team, the marketing team at Bailey, we did at our meeting last week, got the hardest question that you can ever ask a plant person, which is, what is your favorite plant? And so mine was, well, my favorite plant of right now is, and it's the one in the middle. You can see all those little maroon dots. It's called Sanguisorba, or Burnett is the common name. It's another one of those where you don't just plant it on its own because it's not very pretty, but when you plant it in a dense planting like this, it makes its way up through everything else and has those beautiful little dots that sort of dance around. And the reason that I love this planting of it is because you can see on your left-hand side, that's a panicle hydrangea. That's called White Diamonds. But it's not a really dense panicle like you would see on the berry white that I showed you earlier. It's a little bit looser, so it fits this aesthetic really well. Blooms white, like the panicle hydrangeas do, but then turns that pink maroon in fall, so it matches really well with that. This one's called Tanna, T-A-N-N-A, Great Burnett. And then you can sort of see up here, there's like that little gap. That's actually a 9-bark that's planted back there called Fireside, which is like a deep maroon, almost purple leaf as well. So having that Burnett come up through it gives it that really beautiful, wild, dense textural planting, but then the colors all work really well together too. And then on your right-hand side, there's also some Virginia Mountain Mint that also has really beautiful fall color that gets mixed in as well. So again, that really dense, beautiful planting. This is his side yard, his little coffee nook that he's planted at his house in Des Moines. This one is mostly, I think it's all actually herbaceous, perennial material that will die back. So again, it takes a little bit more work because you're going to have to do a little more cut back and maintenance out there than you would with just a shrub planting. But again, really, really beautiful. He's got echinacea, black-eyed Susan. In the back along the house, you see that red that's popping up. That is lobelia, or cardinal flower, cardinal flower that's sticking up. Asters, he's got a lot of asters in this design. So again, really beautiful way to tie it all in. Lots of seasonal color and lots and lots and lots of texture. this is back at my dad's house, and I wanted to show that it's not just that really herbaceous wild planting that you can do. This is the Amber Jubilee 9-bark that I was mentioning earlier, and adding in some of that woody shrub or tree material adds some structure to this. So again, if you're looking for that sort of dense planting but don't really want it to get too wild and crazy, mixing these in, especially a native-ar like this, is a really great way to take a little bit of the wildness away while also giving it some really beautiful color. This is also great because of that picture that I showed you from up above before. That was like July and August when it's really full and raring to go. But if you don't have anything that's going to be there in spring, then you just sort of have an open field too. So planning for all all the seasons is really important, and a great way to do that is adding in some structural material like this. My last one with Kelly, I like to do a little quiz to see if you know what some of these plants are. I'll give you some of the answers. My favorite one is, I'll save for the end. So on the left-hand side, you can see, of course, some more of that brown-eyed Susan that's everywhere. And that's big blue stem in the front. That was actually a cultivar that was bred by Dr. Mary Meyer from the University of Minnesota. She's done a lot of grass work, and she also, if you've read any of the research on pollinators and local native bees, Dr. Meyer has done a lot of that research herself. This one right here looks a little bit like a candle sticking up. That one's called verbena. So it's another one that sort of works its way up through the dense planting. This is late in the season, but it gives you some of those cool tones. It brings some of that purple and blue in there, which is really nice. And then in the middle is Joe Pye weed, is up in the back. This one's called, that one's I think Little Joe. It's there. But the real quiz is the little fingers in front. Does anyone know what those are? You are the only person that's ever got it. It's a sort of a trick question because butterfly weed it blooms purple. I was looking at the purple. Blooms orange in summer into fall, and then as it goes to seed, it goes like that. So it's really another one of those cool things that, like, you want multiple seasons of interest. That's a great way to do it by having a plant that will go to seed and make an added texture. The final archetype is Tommy. This one is named after a garden designer named Thomas Church, who is from California. That sort of like classic California landscape architecture, landscape design. It was really inspired by him. And so this is very clean lines, tidy boxes, where the Kelly is like really dense, intentional planting. This one's maybe a little more fashion over function, but also really, you can do a lot of really cool, beautiful combinations here. The few pictures, the projects that I'm going to share are all California-based, but I'll tie it back here a little bit. So obviously, lots of plants in here that we cannot grow, but one that I love to share in this picture is right here. And this is prairie dropseed. It's another plant that we have a lot of in our designs here. And typically, you would see it more in a Kelly design, in that really dense planting. We're going to do big swaths of that spirobolus or that prairie dropseed throughout. But what I think is so cool, and what I think is fun as you go through the book, is when I always tell people, don't skip ahead. If you think you're a Tommy, it's okay. Still read the other two, because you're going to find these little nuggets. But even though that's typically more of a Kelly-type plant, using it here as a single plant versus as a swath, you're able to see the blades of that ornamental grass later in the season that then matches that really angular, sharp Tommy design. We talked at the beginning a little bit about how furniture can influence our outside design. I love this one because it really ties it all together with those really beautiful earth tones inside, matching that fence, but then using green to brighten up and liven up that space, but then also thinking about light and how light plays a part of this. Remember we showed those ornamental onion and how light plays through the back? Same here. That backlighting really brightens that space up, but ties it all together. And the last project that I want to show you, this again was that California design but there's a lot of really cool stuff that we can pull from it, even though we're in Zone 4. So this one is this Tommy is much more like the monochrome, kind of like we showed with the roses earlier. So this one, a lot of it is greens and whites connected to some earth tones that you can see sort of with the hardscaping in there. He's got aloe vera. He's got the flax lily, which you can see on the left-hand side. So you can see the sort of like diaphanous plume that's coming up. So, you know, it doesn't have to all be really rigid, sharp lines, but can add a little bit more of that in as well. And as this is at the front of the house, and as you start to make your way around the back of the property, you start to see, one thing I didn't share on here, you can see on the left-hand side that fence post cactus starts to make its way through the back of the property as well. So, again, we talked about color earlier as one way to tie different areas of the yard together. This one is using repetition of similar or same species. So he's got the fence post cactus on the left-hand side is more of that flax lily. He's got the golden barrel cactus, the really beautiful earth tones of that hardscaping. And as you continue down that path, as you work your way towards that big garden sculpture, the sculpture back there, you can see more of the flax lily on the side. Lots of sedge. So even though it's a pretty lush, almost dense planting, it's a lot more a repetition of the same product. So instead of like the Kelly, where you've got a lot of different species mixed in, this is a lot of one, or a lot of similar. He's also got the, what else do you have in here? Echeveria, that stone crop around that variegated agave. And then as you keep making your way through, and make your way to that sculpture, what most of us have here, air plants that are this big, you know, in the little glass balls that you can find in garden centers. This is air plant surrounding that sculpture. Plumeria you can sort of see off to the side, and lots of that Berkeley sedge still planted throughout. And as you work your way to the back of the property, you want me to go back one more to get that?
No, thank you.
You got it. As you make your way to the back of the property, of course, more plants that we would have only indoors with the snake plant in front. And along the side you've got some peach. There's lots of different ways to pull people through your space. And, you know, again, going back to like, why are you doing this? What do you want people to experience? What do you want to experience as you're in the garden? You can use plants. You can use a focal point plant all the way at the end to help draw people through. In this space, which is very fitting with this type of design, they're using these physical structures, the metalwork, to draw you through. And so as you're walking through this path, you can almost feel that it's pulling you through with how they built this and the size and scale of those arches. So as you make your way through, pulling you again back towards that agave, a really beautiful way to balance, especially with this Tommy type design, balancing that hardscaping with the plant material, drawing you all the way through. So as I go through these designs I mentioned, we've got the recipe cards, we've got the case studies like at our house, lots and lots of plants that are in there, but there's never enough plants, right? And lots to be inspired by, whether it's something that's going to survive and thrive here in Zone 4, or things that you might throw in a deco pot and have for a season. And so the whole book, the end of the book is all full of additional recipe cards, as well as lots and lots of charts with lots more plant material in there. So thank you very much. Hope we give you a little inspiration as we start to warm up. I can't believe it's going to be almost 80 next week. But I'd love to help answer some questions. Feel free to stay in touch as you're working on projects. I always love to see what everyone's working on. And I'll be around to answer questions and chat and sign books for anyone that's interested. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any immediate questions I can help answer?
Do those conical hydrangeas thrive where other hydrangeas do?
So the ones with the cone-shaped blooms are full sun. So if you've got lots of sun, panicle hydrangeas are great. If you've got some partial sun or some morning sun, especially big leaf hydrangea like the blue one that I showed at the beginning, that's great. If you've got a little bit more shade, a smooth hydrangea or like an Annabelle type will do best there. If you've got full shade, you're going to have a really beautiful green plant and not many blooms. blooms. I know, that's always the hard part. We do a lot of hydrangeas at Bailey, and so we get lots of questions and lots of requests. But the arborescence or that smooth type will do the best with some shade. But the cone-shaped ones, and there's so many different ones too. There's the big ones like berry white and vanilla strawberry. There's some smaller ones. There's a new one that we introduced last year, I think, called Little Hottie. It only gets about this big. Beautiful pure white blooms, stays really compact. Blooms so much you almost can't see the green leaves behind it. So really, really beautiful. Any other general questions? Otherwise, I'm happy to talk specific stuff too, one-on-one.
We have, we live in the city and we have a lot of shade, and we like perennials because of the ease of care. And so what comes to mind for you for shady perennials? And we love the idea of having something blooming through the spring, summer, and
That's not just a hosta?
yeah, we do have lots of hostas. Yeah.
Some of my favorites that are super easy, like Astilbe, would do great. Lungwort is another one. Lungwort. I wish I could remember the name. There's a new cultivar. I'm just going to cheat. I'm going to look it up because I can't remember what the new one is called. But they're really cool. Show you. The shade is always the hard part, right?
Yeah.
So it's a really cool foliage plant, and there's some of them even like this where they're almost like spotted leaves, but they also bloom really beautifully. And there's different cultivars that have different. It's called lungwort.
Oh yeah.
Not like the best name, but
Yeah.
right. But it's a really really great one that's easy to maintain. There's always bleeding hearts, but there's some really cool even hostas like that are really sort of traditional. There's some newer cultivars out that are really, really pretty and different, and even there's some new bleeding hearts where the flower itself is almost variegated. It's really cool. So there's some really fun new things that are coming
What kind
in.
of soil do bleeding hearts like?
They can take, honestly, they're pretty adaptable. I've got really, really terrible soil that we're working on amending slowly over time, and it does really well.
Okay.
It thrives pretty
We
well.
planted one that didn't do well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the problem.
I haven't had great luck with them. And then I go up north to his sister's in Virginia, and she has bushes of
Yeah,
them.
huge, right? Yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, even hostas, there are some new ones that are pretty cool, and there are some too that can get big, massive leaves that are kind of fun to at least fill a little bit of space, and then kind of like in that Kelly design, having some other things that will pop up. Another one that I really like, I think there's a new one called Little Rocket. It's called Ligularia. Let me see if there's a common name for it. Sometimes I get confused. Leopard plant is the common name. I'll show you. So, like this, where it's almost like candlesticks that come up. There's green leaf like that, and even like the foliage is cool. It's got lots of little like cut leaf on it, but then there's also some that have a purple leaf. Nope, this is this one. That one's Pandora. But it's a shade plant that blooms and gives it a little color.
Yeah.
That's mixed in there. So yeah, of course. Anything else?
So I came in a few minutes later. Cultivar. What are? Did you already go over that, and now you don't want it again?
No. We talked a little bit about nativars, which are cultivated native plants. So a cultivar, really all that is a unique variety. So going back to our hydrangea example, berry white is a cultivar of a panicle hydrangea. It is a cultivated, individual, unique variety from that species. It's all these plant names that we just throw back and forth, and but that's all it is. it's a unique individual variety. Yes, and the nativars are the native species to your region that might be cultivated. And that could mean that it is bred, there's breeding work, or there's more human intervention, or it could mean like that fiber optics buttonbush that I was talking about, where it was just a natural mutation that was selected because it has better form, longer lasting flowers, better disease resistance, that is then cultivated or reproduced in a nursery setting. And so that's always, I have a whole separate talk that I do on nativars, because it's a really hot topic. Native plants are really important, and I always have the caveat for that, where it's your individual choice for how native is native. Is it, some people say if it's from North America, cool, I'm in. Some people say it has to be from my state, some my county. It really is up to the individual. And it's a little challenging because there's relatively limited research on nativars and the impact on insects and pollinators. There's been some through Mount Cuba Center in Delaware. There's Dr. Annie White, who's in Vermont, I want to say. One was really focused on pollinators. One was really focused on herbivores, insects. There should be more, and Mount Cuba is doing more. Doug Tallamy is a really fabulous researcher. He's the one that did it at Mount Cuba Center. He's written a bunch of books. He's leading a lot more research, because then some of the questions are, okay, if you've got nativar that has been changed, if there is more human intervention, is the pollen as effective as native species? But even if you're buying straight species, if it was produced in a nursery setting, there's question is if that's as effective as rather than just straight seed source. So again, whole separate topic, but generally the research has shown that unless you go from a single flower to a double flower, or a plant that naturally has green leaves and you turn it to purple, the impact on pollinators and herbivores is limited, if any. In fact, Dr. White found in her research that there were some nativars that were more attractive to pollinators than straight species, because it was longer flowering and the nectar and pollen were easier to access. So it's a whole thing. But Doug has a great book on it. Can't remember the name of it, but he's got a great book.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So actually, two questions. One is, I'm interested in your thoughts on some of the advice we're reading about not cutting the plants back or cutting the grass until well into May, so as not to disturb the nests of the pollinators. That's question one.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of conversation about it, and even, the traditional, just go back in fall and cut everything back to the ground, get the work out of the way. Same thing, there's a lot of native insects that use our plants to survive the winter, and so leaving them up gives them a place to host for the winter months. Again, it's sort of that personal choice of how much do you want to do. Some people like to do some in the fall, so there's less work in spring, but still leave some things up. And it's the same for spring. Just trying to have less disturbance gives them a better chance at coming out of their hibernation in spring.
And so is that through April or into May, or is there any?
This year, July.
Right.
Do you access your plant?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's why the No Mow May has taken off, because then at least it gives them more time to wake up and get out. So same thing with just going back and cutting back some of your perennials.
Yeah.
The longer they have, better off.
And then my other question is, if there is a good resource you would recommend for advice on when to prune shrubs, how much to prune shrubs, like honeysuckle
wish I could give you one really like comprehensive place. There are. I actually might have a couple here. I think Durr's book is just trees, but there's a book by. I mean, it's like an encyclopedia, but it's by Dr. Michael Durr, and I think it's literally called the Encyclopedia of Shrubs and Trees. That has all of that. So, I mean, you can Google too and find it, but that would be the one source that has all of the things.
A lot of people refer to extension.
Yeah.
Maybe they have information.
Yep,
on
Master
that.
Gardeners through University of Minnesota Extension. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they've got a lot of info online as well. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'll run up front if anyone would like a book.